Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am sportslogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. This is a very special episode of Baseball by Design. This is one that Dan Simon and I have been talking about for quite some time. Dan Simon, designer extraordinaire of Studio Simon, creator of so many great works of art out there in the minor league baseball world. Dan is on every single episode of Baseball by Design. So often when we record, we have these great conversations that have nothing to do with the episode at hand that we always have to cut away from the recording because, the recordings would be too long and these tangents are not really part of what we're talking about on that particular episode. So what with it being the holidays and what with it being sort of a special occasion, we just thought, let's have an episode where we fire up the recording, we pour ourselves a beer, and just chat. Dan, Simon, happy holidays. What are you drinking?
Happy holidays to you too. Let me point out to your listeners.
Our listeners, Dan.
Okay, our listeners, that another thing that makes this episode different, if not special, is that every time we have recorded in the past, save for when we were in Birmingham, we always record early in the morning.
Right.
Normally like anywhere between 9 and 10 o'clock my time, which makes it 7 and 8 o'clock your time, which is like a full hour before I usually start drinking beer. So first of all, cheers to the first ever evening recording and accompanied by beer. And I am having a Brooklyn Brewery black chocolate stout. And I want to point out that the Brooklyn Brewery logo, this was designed by somebody, Paul, I am certain, as a graphic designer, which both you and I are, as a graphic designer you have heard of. This logo was designed by who is the godfather of graphic design?
Saul Bass.
Well, yeah, Saul Bass, that's a good answer. But I was thinking of Milton Glaser.
Oh, Milton Glaser of I Heart New York fame.
Yep. And also of the Brooklyn Brewery logo fame. So
Milton Glaser did the Brooklyn Brewery logo. I don't know who designed the logo for the left-hand peanut butter milk stout that I'm drinking. Their logo is a red hand, but I'm drinking a peanut butter milk stout. So one of the things that we've learned, you and I have had beers together before. We had beers together in Louisville at a Louisville Bats game and at that brewery right there outside the ballpark. And of course, we've shared some drinks during that Alabama road trip that we took when we saw the Rocket City Trash Pandas. And of course, your Savannah Bananas at Rickwood Field. We shared beers. I don't recall both of us drinking heavy, dark stouts at the same time, possibly because it was summertime, possibly because we were at baseball games.
Well, at the games themselves, it's hard to get a good dark beer. And so I'll just normally have a quote unquote regular beer, a Bud Light or Coors Light or Miller Light, or not light, but Coors, the American beers.
The banquet beers.
Right. I'm fine with having those at a ball game. Again, you mentioned it being summertime, it being hot, and those beers are nice and refreshing on such occasions. I am happy to have a stout or a porter, or also, I really love Scottish ales, and those are hard to find.
What have you chosen to display from your work behind you there?
Okay, for our listeners, in my office, there's a display area. There's shelves and hooks where jerseys hang, shelves for caps, and that was meant to display some of the stuff that I've designed. But I end up getting so many caps, mainly samples that are sent to me for embroidery approval purposes, and I have long ago run out of space for displaying all of them. So behind me is supposed to be a conference table, and it's covered with baseball caps just because I have no place else to put them. to answer your question, what's there? We won't go through all of them. I've got the Hudson Valley Renegades Copa de la Diversión cap, 3 Savannah Banana caps, a Fort Myers Miracle batting practice cap.
The original classic Fort Myers Miracle logo.
There
Do I
is
see am I looking at an Iowa caucuses?
yes.
So
Yeah.
you did both the New Hampshire primaries and the Iowa caucuses.
You know what? I never thought about the fact that I did both of those, but yes. And so if somebody wants to do maybe the like Fredericksburg Nationals, an alternate identity for the Fredericksburg presidential elections or something like that, I'm your
How
man.
about this? How about this? How about the Jackson general election?
Well, I did the Jackson Generals identity.
That's what I'm saying. There's a theme here. We could tag on to that.
The Jackson Generals, may they rest in peace.
Indeed. So just seeing that you have these hats behind you, these are all identities that you've created. When we went to that game in Louisville, you showed up head to toe. Well, not head to toe. You had a hat and a jersey on for the Savannah Bananas. How often will you wear things that you designed out there in the world just because you like the designs?
Rarely.
Mm.
And I know that probably comes as a surprise to you and to your listeners, but the reason for that is because I don't go by design, I go by comfort. For whatever reason, I have either the size or shape of my head makes New Era 5150 caps not particularly comfortable for me.
Okay.
So even though I've got hundreds of them here in my office and others at home, I rarely wear them. I've put 1 or 2 or 3 on when we're doing a certain podcast, and I've got a cap that tends to have some connection to that particular episode. But when I need to wear a baseball cap, the cap I wear most often is a University of Virginia. Listen to me talking like a New Yorker, which is what I am by birth. Virginia, University of Virginia cap. My son graduated undergrad from the University of Virginia. My wife went to law school there. I also really love that logo. Mm-hmm. But what I love the most about that cap is it's the most comfortable cap I have. So when I need to wear a cap, I put that one on. Why I chose to wear the Bananas cap and jersey when we met up for that game here in Louisville, I wanted to put something on that was, because I figured you guys would be wearing branded stuff. So I wanted to put something on.
Did you wear that same jersey? I'm trying to remember the picture.
Yes.
You wore that same jersey when we saw the Bananas at Rickwood Field.
Same jersey, same cap.
Same jersey. I have a question for you about that. So now I'm remembering that day. We were hanging out down the first baseline, and it was between innings, and there was sort of a commotion in the stands, and I realized it was because there was a ball coming our way. The catcher for the Bananas had thrown one of these yellow baseballs. It was sailing our way. I looked up, grabbed it out of the air, snatched it out of the air with my left hand. It's such a satisfying feeling to catch a ball on a big arc like that with your bare hand, right in front of Donnie Wise's glove. I apologize, Donnie, for catching that right in front of you. And then, next section over, there was a kid. I just tossed him the ball because that's sort of a habit of mine. Have you ever caught a foul ball? Have you ever gotten a ball from a player or whatever? What's your philosophy on, do you give it to a kid? Do you keep it?
I have caught a ball on more than one occasion. I have never caught one in a major league game, and I've been in many major league games, and I still daydream about catching a ball at a major league game. I caught one at a game at Slugger Field, and we were in a suite, but we were sitting in the stadium seats in front of the suite. And so right in front of where we were sitting, there was a walking aisle, and the ball hit the concrete that was below us but in part of that walking aisle, hit that, caromed off of that, hit the railing in front of that, caromed up in the air and right into my hands. It was the darndest thing.
Oh,
And my son Casey, who at the time, he's my younger son, but at the time was 8, 9, 10 years old. I immediately gave the ball to my son.
oh, well, of course.
But then during the game, he was misbehaving. He was like taking peanuts and like, I don't remember exactly what it was, like flicking them off of this concrete wall, the top of this wall, and I said to him, Casey, you need to stop doing that.
Yeah.
And he would stop for a little while and then start doing it again.
Yeah.
And then I warned him again, and then finally I said, Casey, if you do that again, I'm going to take that ball away from you.
Sure.
And he did it again, and I took the ball away. And to this day, I actually feel I did what I needed to do, but I still feel horrible about it.
What happened to the ball?
I kept it.
Oh, okay.
And at some point, I used that ball for somebody as a ball for somebody to autograph, and I couldn't tell you who that was. So,
wow. That's a great story. My brother has kind of an opposite story of that, where he has very, very fancy seats at Philadelphia Phillies games. And there was one time there was a foul ball. He's 3 rows behind home plate. There was a foul ball that went straight up in the air and then straight down in front of my brother. Like the only angle that could ever get a ball to my brother in these seats, because there's the net there, right? So it had to go straight up and then like right back down the chute. It bounced in front of my brother and then bounced straight back up into the air through his hands. And my nephew, who was pretty little at the time, but who was also sitting in these very fancy seats, was very sad to have missed out on the opportunity for a foul ball. And so the ushers, who took very good care of the patrons in these seats, brought a ball to my nephew, which they then took home and put on a little in a little case. And my brother refers to it as the ball of shame, because he missed that foul ball that he should have caught. So that is.
Well, speaking of not catching foul balls, I was in another Bats game. This was with my sister Debbie. And on this day, we went to a day game during the week at Louisville Slugger Field. And because it was a day game during the week, it was a relatively small crowd. So we were able to move wherever our seats were. We didn't sit in where our tickets were. We were able to go to the first row right behind the dugout. One point during the game, the batter squared to bunt. Instead of bunting it in fair territory and the play plays out, it skipped off, like just barely touched the top of his bat. So what it did was, all it did was redirect the ball directly at us. So this was still going, I think, 80 plus miles an hour, coming right at us. My only thought was, protect your sister. And the ball skipped off the dugout roof. We're sitting right in the dugout. So I don't have like a good play on it. So I put up both my hands and I was able to block it, and it bounced back onto the field.
How did your hand feel after that?
It's not important how my hand felt. It's how I felt, because I got booed for not catching the ball. And it's like, you're booing me? That was just not just self-preservation, but preservation of my family.
Yeah.
And I was, my first thought was, I protected my sister. My next thought was, I'm getting booed for this. So I'll never forget that. It's like, no, you can't boo somebody for that. That was, you know what? If I caught that ball skipping off the dugout roof at the speed it was doing it, then I deserve a standing ovation. But for just deflecting it out of the way of harm, I should have at least gotten, if not an ovation, some appreciation.
Indeed. That's you deserve all the accolades for that.
Little did we know that when we embarked on this previously unprecedented podcast, where we don't actually have a subject, it's just let's have these talks that we normally talk, that it would be a podcast all about catching foul balls.
Who knew? Hey, well, so here, I do have a question for you. There's one thing that I had in my back pocket for this episode, and that is the font brush script. So I think that every designer has that like peccadillo font that they don't like. I have been noticing ever since you pointed out, because I think for most designers, like the obvious one is Comic Sans, right? Because it's ludicrous. And then, maybe Papyrus, because it's hilarious that they used it in Avatar. Papyrus to me is the font that you use if you've got if you're a massage therapist and you put your business on a business card and you put it on a bulletin board at a coffee shop, right? Like that's Papyrus for you. Yours was brush script. And I have to say, ever since you pointed that out to me, ever since you said that your hang up of a font is brush script, I have been seeing it everywhere. And sometimes I've even stopped and sent you pictures. I was actually recently, as listeners of this podcast might know, I was recently in Laos, which is on the other side of the planet from where I am right now. It's over there by Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand. And I was, walking through the streets of Luang Prabang, Laos, and sure enough, there's brush script on a sign outside a store. I almost took a picture and sent it to you, except for you, it would have been the middle of the night, and I didn't want to text you at 3 a.m. with, "Hey, look I found brush script." Why brush script? Are there other fonts? Are there other design peccadillos that you have that we can talk about on this free form episode?
Brush script is the script used oftentimes for sports, and more specifically baseball scripts, by people, and I'll put in quote designers with air quotes here, who don't know any better.
Yeah.
Okay. There's nothing wrong with it as far as how well it's done. It is a perfectly fine script. It's just been used so many times, and it's an existing script, so it's not custom, and it's really not a baseball font. There's so many scripts in baseball, but I wouldn't say that any of them really are brush scripts, except when people use the font brush script. So, and similar to that, also in the world of sports branding, there's this font, tell me if you're familiar with it, it's not a script, it's called Serpentine. Are you familiar with that?
I am. I thought you were going to say Ballpark Wiener, but I am also familiar with Serpentine. There is one called Ballpark Wiener that I see all the time.
Well, I'm not familiar with Ballpark Wiener, but I do know that when I hear that name, it made me giggle.
It did. I saw you giggle. I saw it happen.
Serpentine is a font that has the small little pointy serifs like copperplate has. Some people refer to them as copperplate serifs, but there's an actual word for them.
Yeah.
And this Serpentine font is kind of like a squared off font, but with rounded edges, and then these little pointy serifs. And
I wish people could see, by the way, the contortions that you are going through with your arms and your hands to try to describe the serifs on this Serpentine font. We're going to take an interlude, a brief interlude here, Dan, and we'll be right back after this important message.
Do you have messages?
No, I don't have messages, but what that was just now, Dan, was an excuse for me to pour a second beer. And now I am on the Horse and Dragon brewery, which is a brewery here in Fort Collins, and they do one of my all-time favorite beers. It's called Sad Panda, and it is yet another stout because it's Colorado and it's December and it's cold, and I'm drinking dark beers. So Sad Panda from Horse and Dragon is my second beer. I was getting ready to ask you, Dan, if you had other design hang-ups or other things that you notice out there in the world that you think other people don't. Mine, I have to say, is letter spacing. When I see bad letter spacing, it drives me crazy, and I think it's something that people don't notice, and unless they're in the field. Is there something in particular that you see out there in the visual environment that drives you crazy?
You've answered my question by stating what drives you so crazy:
Mm.
letter spacing,
Oh,
otherwise known as kerning in design speak. It has to do with the space between letters, the
okay.
spacing between letters, and I am a major stickler for letter spacing. There are other sports branding professionals who will contact me when they're working on something,
Mm.
and they will even send me the file and say, will you please letter space this for me?
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's happened on multiple occasions.
Because
Now,
it's more art than science, letter spacing.
right, because it's not literally how far is this letter from the letter next to it compared to that letter and the
Right.
letter next to the next
It's
one.
all optics.
Right, because you've got all these weird negative spaces. Like
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
you've got the letter N next to the letter H,
Hmm.
you've got these vertical sides,
Yeah.
and you then have another letter, the letter whatever,
Yeah.
next to it that also has vertical sides. It's easy.
Yeah.
That is something you can measure. But
Yeah.
then you
Yeah.
get the letter A, let's say.
Hmm.
And if it's vertical letters, parts of the letter are angled, now you've got a completely different,
Yeah.
you've got this negative area. And then you take the letter L, which has a crazy amount of space, or the letter X, which has its own negative areas.
Yeah.
And what it really all comes down to is it's all visual.
Yeah.
You have to look at it, and what your letter spacing should be consistent throughout. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's very difficult.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name examples because the designers who did this will feel like they're being dissed. But there are things in major league sports where word marks for these teams have atrocious letter spacing,
Mm.
or the letter spacing's fine except for at the very end where you might have an L next to I don't know, an S, let's say. And it's
Right.
like, well, everything else was spaced, and then you've got this giant space there because of that. Because L is the worst letter in the
Yeah.
alphabet from a letter spacing standpoint.
Objectively speaking, L is the worst letter in the alphabet. Just objectively.
But without L, you would not have the quartet that I love so much, Elemento. If I were a rap
Elemento.
artist, my rap name would be Elemento.
I like that very much. The having other designers turn to you for their letter spacing needs, though, is quite the accolade. I remember in grad school there were so many tricks and techniques that designers used to try to do that, where like you'd visualize balloons between the letters, or you would cover up the bottom half of the letter, or they would turn the letters upside down so that they could see them objectively. It was always something that like no two designers would agree on the letter spacing of especially capital letters. Like lowercase letters, I feel like they're a lot easier to letter space, but
Well,
capital letters, which is usually what you're dealing with in a word mark, are a lot harder to work with.
listeners, we're getting into some design minutia here.
Oh man,
And
it's
I was just yesterday on my walk to work, I was listening to the most recent episode of the Baseball by Design podcast with Paul Caputo, host, and Todd Radom, guest, talking about more baseball design minutia, the upside down, backwards, wrongly rotated apostrophe in the Baltimore Orioles O apostrophe S logo.
it's loathsome.
In speaking about that apostrophe, you asked me what my theory was for why that apostrophe was wrong.
Hmm.
And my immediate answer was human fallibility.
Yeah,
Somebody just made a mistake.
yeah.
Under the heading of human fallibility falls something Dan Simons said when you asked me about if I had ever done a logo with apostrophes in it.
Mm.
And the first one I mentioned was the logo for what I said was a collegiate summer league team the Birmingham Bells.
Oh,
I,
you didn't say the Bellingham Bells? You said
I
Birmingham?
Yep, I thought I said Bellingham,
Oh,
but
that's
when I
funny.
listened to the podcast yesterday morning, I literally I was so beside myself for it's like, how did you? My first thought was, why did you say Birmingham? But I immediately thought, we've talked about Birmingham so
Sure.
much because of this great trip that you, Ranger Amy, Anna DiTomaso, and myself had to Birmingham. We've talked about it before. We talked about it on this episode. Um, it's just very top of mind for me. So I guess I've just got Birmingham on the brain.
Well, I remember on that road trip, we got to, you picked us up, you picked Ranger Amy and me up from the airport, and we drove up to the Rocket City Trash Pandas game in Madison. And I remember in the car, we were just chatting, right? Like we were chatting about sort of whatever. And I thought, I wish I were running a microphone right now because this would be a great episode. And that's essentially what this episode of the podcast has been. If you can imagine this episode of the podcast extrapolated to like 48 hours, that was our Alabama road trip there. So I know that we're talking about trying to find another time in 2024 to get to a ball game, the three of us together, the four of us with Ranger Amy and Anna DiTomaso and you and me. We haven't formalized those plans yet. So, and I'll tell you, I do have some plans right now for 2024 already. One of my Christmas presents for Ranger Amy is I have purchased tickets to the London series. We're going to go see.
That's amazing.
We're going to go see the Phillies play the Mets in London
Oh,
in
wow.
June.
Have you been to London before?
Not since 1999. It's been a long time.
My wife, AJ, who I've mentioned in this episode, and I would imagine I've mentioned her previously, she lived from, I don't know, the age of 2.5 to 7, something like that, in London. So, but I had never been there until earlier this year when I went on my first trip to London with my wife, AJ, and I am completely in love with London. So the thought of somebody A, going to London, which I fell in love with, and B, going to see their favorite team playing in London in the London series, what a great trip.
Oh, you got beer number 2. All right.
Yes, I'm up. This is now beer number 2. I still have a couple of sips left of beer number 1, my Brooklyn Brewery Black Chocolate Stout. This one is Founders Brewing, and this one is a Scotch ale, and this one is called, pardon my French, Dirty Bastard.
That Dirty Bastard. I like it. With a logo, little known fact, designed by famous designer Paul Rand. Okay, maybe that's not true. I don't know.
Yes, I wouldn't say this is Paul Rand's, but and of this beer, right on the label, it says rich caramel notes, malty sweetness. It's like, how could you not want one of these?
It sounds delicious.
Here's one of the things I love so much about my wife, AJ. I am generalizing here. I don't know about Ranger Amy, but most women do not like darker, heavier beers. My wife loves beer. She loves ciders. She loves fruity things, but she also really likes darker, heavier beers. And somebody, if you saw her, you would never peg her for somebody who would drink a beer like that. And I get to go out with her and share beers like that with her. I love that.
Ranger Amy only likes beers with labels designed by Joseph Mueller Brockman. She's very, very particular. Maybe David Carson if she's really feeling adventurous. Ranger Amy does like a dark beer, actually, and I like that because then we get to go out and we get to share dark beers. We're at a certain point here. We're going to turn to. I know that we've prepared very little for this episode, but we did mention, or you did mention, that you have a Studio Simon stumper prepared for this episode. So we are going to keep in the tradition of Baseball by Design, the podcast, and have a Studio Simon stumper here at some point. I'm guessing that stumper is not going to be about famous graphic designers who have designed beer labels.
It's so weird you mentioned that because that's exactly what the stumper is. It's almost as if you knew that's what I was going to be doing.
Famous graphic designers who caught foul balls and gave them to kids.
you know, for our listeners, I want to point out that I was the one who went to Paul and suggested the possibility of me doing a stumper at the end of each podcast.
Mm.
What I didn't consider when I made that suggestion was that I would need to do it for a second podcast and a third podcast, and a fourth podcast. Maybe I thought about that much, but I certainly didn't think about we're close to, if not at a year
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
doing these,
Yeah.
and that's one a week.
Yeah.
Now you might think that it doesn't take up that much time, and maybe in the whole scheme of things, it doesn't, but I've been really, really busy and I haven't had time to like clear the leaves off of my front lawn. I didn't have the I did not put up holiday decorations outside our house this year because I just have not had time. And I've worked like the last 7 straight weekends. Um, but I don't want this streak to end. I don't want there to be an
Yeah.
episode of the Baseball by Design podcast where Paul has to say, I'm sorry, but due to how busy Dan is or any
Yep.
other extenuating circumstances, there'll be no Studio Simon Stumper. I committed to this, and when I commit to something, I commit to it.
You
And
sure do. And I know that you put a lot of work into these. And, I can only imagine, you going to AJ and saying, I'm sorry, we're not going to have Christmas tree this year because I am rewatching Fear Strikes Out so that I can come up with a Baseball by Design Studio Simon Stumper about Jimmy Pearsall.
are you going to watch? Are you going to try to watch Fear Strikes Out?
I
Or
am, yes. I didn't realize, I'm just seeing this now, that Fear Strikes Out was in 1957. I always thought it was a more recent movie than that. And it's also going to cost me $3.79 on Amazon Prime.
okay,
In
make
the
it happen.
meantime, let's go to Studio Simon Stumpers here on this special holiday edition of Baseball by Design.
Okay. Well, this is a special holiday edition,
Mm.
but holidays have certainly not been the theme of this. So there really was no theme. Now we ended up speaking about certain things, mainly about catching foul balls at
Foul
baseball,
balls, brush script.
kerning, and letter spacing, and
Yeah.
ad scripts, yeah, and all that. Um,
Do you know what one of my favorite little bits of graphic design minutia is? Graphic design trivia is why uppercase letters are called uppercase letters and lowercase letters are called lowercase letters, which is back in the days before computers and you had trays of metal type, they would keep the capital letters literally on the upper case above the shelf where they were working, and the lowercase letters were literally in a shelf below the place where they were working.
well, speaking of wonderful little bits of trivia, you telling that story reminds me of actually a baseball story where I was for one season, and this would have been it was the strike season, 1994, I believe. Was that a
Yeah,
strike season?
absolutely. It was the year
Okay.
the Montreal Expos were going to win the World Series.
I worked for the Los Angeles Dodgers from 1996 through 2001. So this was prior to me even knowing I would someday work for the Dodgers. And this is when we were living in Los Angeles. AJ and I bought, I don't remember if it was, I don't think it was half. I think we bought like a quarter of the season. And we had great seats. We were on, Dodger Stadium has 4 levels. You have the field level, the mezzanine level, the sort of the upper deck, and then they have an upper deck. So we're on the mezzanine level, just above the field level, which frankly, from a vantage standpoint, probably gives you the best view of the game. And we were between home plate and third base. So that's the Dodgers dugout side, closer to home plate. So really good seats, close down. We were right next to the players' family and girlfriend section.
The
So I
Wags.
even remember like sitting there with Raul Mondesi's family there. And Raul Mondesi Jr., who is now in the major leagues, Raul Mondesi Jr. was there like as a 4 or 5 year old, or I don't know how old he was, but he wasn't the major leaguer he is today. But anyway, we were in those seats, and I don't remember how this came up, but we were talking about the term can of corn. Now, do you know the story of that? Or
I think you've told this story on this podcast about the story that I remember is that in the old days in shops, there were shelves of things that you couldn't always get to, and way up high, there was literally like that's where the can of corn was kept, and the shop owner had like a little hook where you would pull it, and then they had to catch it after it fell off the shelf. So they were pulling it, they were literally pulling a can of corn off a shelf, and then you would catch it before, obviously it splattered all
right,
over the ground.
exactly, and they would actually catch it. If you look at general store owners of that day and age, they often were wearing aprons,
Mhm.
and they would like hold their apron out almost like catching somebody jumping off a roof, like as a
Yeah,
not a parachute, but you know what I'm talking
I
about.
do.
Hopefully. Have you ever caught somebody jumping off a roof? You know what
All
you
the
do.
time. It's
You just
happened. It actually happened 3 times today on the way home from work.
as it's going to. It happens all
You're
over the
always
place.
jumping off of roofs.
So anyway, they catch it in their aprons, and that's where the term can of corn comes from. And when I was telling this story, when I finished telling the story, somebody sitting near us was wondering where that term came from. I knew the answer because I'm a geek. And when I finished telling this story, I finished it up by saying, ergo, can of corn. And to this day, that was 1994, doing the math, almost 30 years ago. My wife still teases me about using the term ergo in conversation with somebody.
It's a great. I love it. I love it. Now, you mentioned that you worked at Dodger. Well, you worked for the Dodgers. Did you work at Dodger Stadium?
Oh, I did indeed.
So
And
that
it
was your
was,
place of work. I've been to Dodger Stadium 3 times. It's a terrific place to watch a ball game. I really enjoy seeing a ball game there. I learned on my most recent trip there that the colors of the seats are meant to evoke the colors of the beach, sand at the beach and water of the ocean. Is that consistent with what you know about that place?
um, I have not heard that, but that
Oh,
makes perfect sense. That building, it's not a building, that stadium was built under the direction of Hall of Famer Walter O'Malley. Walter O'Malley was a visionary. He envisioned bringing Major League Baseball to the West Coast. He created the stadium that, even though now it's the second oldest stadium in the National League behind Wrigley Field, you wouldn't think of Dodger Stadium as in the same um, chronological category as Wrigley Field, and really it's not, because Wrigley Field opened in the 1910s. I don't remember the exact year.
can you name the third oldest National League stadium? The answer is shocking.
No, but it's going to be something much more recent.
It
So,
is it is Coors Field in
wow,
Denver.
wow, that is shocking.
Yeah.
But that goes to show that even though Dodger Stadium opened in the 1960s as opposed to the 1910s when Wrigley Field opened, there just aren't old stadiums left
Right.
anymore. But Dodger Stadium, even though it's approximately 60-year-old stadium, it's still looked at as an absolute gem.
Yeah, it's a
And
beauty. It's a great
um,
place to watch a game.
and so think about Walter O'Malley, whose vision for the stadium, it was his vision for the stadium. And to this day, it's still this destination because of its beauty, and it's interesting visually.
Mhm.
It's just a tremendous place. And the fact that I got to call that my working home for exactly, I was there 6 seasons, 5 years, is I'm so blessed to have been able to do that. As a matter of fact, I remember one time, night games would start at 7 p.m. thereabouts. The games back then took about 3 hours, so it ends at 10 to 11 o'clock. And then I worked in the merchandise department. They had to close up all the merchandise stands. They had to count the money. And by the time it was time to leave, it was pretty late. And I remember walking out one night with a coworker of mine. We were the last ones, at least from our department, walking out, closing that door and I'm turning the key in the lock, and it hit me. I'm locking up Dodger Stadium. It was kind of a surreal experience that to this day I'll never forget. And I was, there's this thing that you say, I'm the luckiest boy on earth. I was the luckiest boy on earth. I had the opportunity to work for a storied franchise in one of the greatest cathedrals in sports. And as a big baseball fan, as I think you guys might have caught on that I am, how lucky can somebody be?
Pretty incredible story. I can only imagine what it would be like to go to any ballpark every single day, let alone Dodger Stadium, which even as a Phillies fan, I acknowledge is a cathedral of the game. Dan, we've been talking for a while. We knew we would. We're a couple of beers in. My glass is empty. And so I think that means it is time to turn to you to wrap us up with this week's Studio Simon Stumper. It's got to be like the 45th of these that we've done here. I mean, honestly, I think it's been about 45, which, as you say, is almost a year. I can't even imagine what this week's Studio Simon Stumper is going to be.
Well, because we didn't have a theme going in, I was thinking, what is the theme going to be?
Yeah.
And the reality is, it's Paul Caputo speaking with Dan Simon.
Yeah.
So I made it about me. So here we go. Our Studio Simon Stumper tonight. Normally I say today, but today's the first night. Our Studio Simon Stumper tonight asks, which one of these titles is or was not a title bestowed upon me?
2 truths and a lie.
Is or was it A, Colonel, B, Chef, or C, Professor?
So can I don't often ask for clarification on this, but are these informal titles bestowed by friends or formal official designations from institutions?
Formal official designations, not by friends, not as a nickname or anything like that.
Colonel, like the Cedar Rapids Colonels, for whom you developed a logo. Chef.
Wait. Let's back up. No, it's nothing like the Cedar Rapids Colonels, because we're not talking about a corn kernel, which is what the Cedar Rapids Colonel is. We're talking about
the military designation.
Right. And it's not always military. But it derives from the military.
Okay. Chef, as in someone who is a culinary artist. And what was the last one?
Professor.
Man, I'm trying to bust out. Maybe it's the 2 dark beers in. Maybe it's the fact that it's 7 o'clock at night here in Fort Collins, Colorado. I am going to say, Professor, I can see you. There's an instructive manner about Dan Simon. I can see a situation where you would be offering a training, offering some sort of coursework, some sort of learning opportunity. So I'm going to say Professor is a possibility that's one of the 2 truths. Chef, so many designers, they love the way things are meant to come together, the way various elements are meant to come together to create a larger masterpiece, type and image and color and line weights and one element balancing against another. So I can see how a designer as chef would work. Colonel feels so specific to me. It feels so military. I know that you just said it doesn't have to be military, that it derives from the military. Dan, I don't think that you have been a professor in a college setting. I believe that that's where they would call you professor. I'm going professor. Final answer. That's the lie.
I'm sorry. Why you were very from somebody who was trying to suss this out,
I know.
you immediately became very determined. What made you so certain that am not or was not a professor?
I bailed on professor because I feel like professor is reserved for you are in a college or university setting. I don't recall having ever spoken to you about a situation where you were conducting courses in a college or university setting, and that to me is the only official designation of a professor.
Because of what you know about me and how I am and who I am, do you feel that you just don't see me in an educational setting?
Not at all. No, I could absolutely see you in an educational setting. I can see you in a bow tie at the front of the course. That absolutely I can see you instructing a group of students. But I just feel like if that were something in your past, after 40 some episodes of Baseball by Design, Studio Simon Stumpers, plus, our relationship dating back probably a decade, talking, about the work that you do for sportslogos.net articles, and especially considering that I grew up with academics. My father was a professor of philosophy at Villanova University. My mom was an art teacher. I feel like maybe this would have come up. So, and as I get entrenched further into this answer, I feel like if it's wrong, that the stakes are super high right now.
Now the stakes are not high. What I will say is this. You and I have indeed been friends for, it's got to be at least a decade, if not
Right.
longer.
Yeah.
We've gotten to know each other over the years to the extent that we've traveled with each other, and we will be traveling again. But I suppose there are things about me you just don't know. So, Paul, I was indeed a professor.
Really?
I taught one semester of design at Cal State Northridge.
While you were with the Dodgers? No.
This was post Dodgers,
Mm.
just before I moved to Louisville. So this would have been spring semester of 2002. So I was Professor Simon. Now, nobody called me that. They called me certain things. So I was indeed a professor.
Did you also get to dress up as Matty the Matador from Cal State Northridge?
Is that what it's called?
Matty the Matador is the Cal State Northridge mascot.
Okay. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this in any of our previous discussions, but a very, very, very close friend of mine is a fellow sports branding professional named Joe Bosack. Joe Bosack did what is the current athletics brand identity for Cal State Northridge.
Oh.
So he didn't do the mascot, but whatever the Matador in their current logo suite is a Joe Bosack design. Joe's one of the best sports branding professionals ever.
I'm dying to know which one's the lie, though, chef or colonel.
Okay, let's do this then. Now we're narrowing it down to 2. So this is that 50% thing.
Oh, no. Now I'm going to go 0 for 2.
Let's see if you go over 2. It's between chef and colonel.
I'm going to say chef. You steered me away from colonel a couple of times. I'm following my instincts. I'm going to say no one ever called you chef. Professor.
I actually felt like I was trying not to steer you towards colonel.
Uh-huh.
But I was defending colonel on purpose because, Paul, I am officially a Kentucky colonel.
What does that mean? What is a Kentucky colonel? And I did go over 2. This is why I should not drink before doing Studio Simon Stumpers. What is a Kentucky colonel?
This is like Seth Meyers does this thing, or he used to do this thing called day drinking. Are you at all familiar with that?
Oh, for sure. Am I
Okay.
familiar with day drinking? That is the question, Dan.
No, no,
Simon.
no.
Just
Not are
no,
you
I know.
familiar with day drinking? Are you familiar with the fact that Seth Meyers has
Yes.
done segments on that? So
Yeah.
this is night drinking for Paul. So nope, I am a member of the Honorable Order of Kentucky Colonels. Now,
Mm,
you might think, okay, well, what does that really mean? To be part of the honor, not part, a member of the Honorable Order of Kentucky Colonels, you must be nominated by the governor of the state of Kentucky. And I was nominated by Paul Patton, who at the time I was nominated, this goes back to the early 2000s. Paul Patton was the governor of Kentucky, the 59th governor of Kentucky from 1995 till 2003. And he was the first governor in Kentucky to be elected to a second term in 200 years. Now, you might be asking, well, what does that mean? The Kentucky Colonels, it started as it was a military thing, legitimate colonels in the army or whatever. It then morphed into something more ceremonial, where you were still deemed a colonel, but you were there for kind of show. And it then morphed into a charitable organization. The Honorable Order of Kentucky Colonels now is people who are doing good for the state of Kentucky. It's become a charitable organization. And if they can present, they being the people who pose to the governor, here's why this person should be a Kentucky colonel, they're saying why this person's a good person and how they will do good for the state of Kentucky. And I was deemed worthy of being a Kentucky colonel. And what I am not is a chef. I have no sense of smell.
oh,
And as a result, I do cook, but I can't cook and flavor things by taste because my sense of taste is diminished due to not having a sense of smell. So the last thing I think I would ever be is a chef. So that is the answer to today's Studio Simon Stumper.
I thought for sure that, maybe like when you were 16 years old, you were going to have worked in a Burger King or something. And
I would have thought, though, I might have been given it away because I live in the state of Kentucky where there's a certain colonel who made a certain dish that was fried and made of poultry that you
uh,
might have thought, well, you're in Kentucky. This guy named Colonel Sanders.
Colonel Sanders is going to feature prominently in a forthcoming episode of Baseball by Design on the Hanshin Tigers, because there was an incident with Tigers fans who threw a statue of Colonel Sanders into the river in 1985 as they were celebrating a championship for their team, which resulted in a 38-year curse being bestowed upon their team.
I am very interested to listen to that episode, to frankly to hear the story, but more specifically so that I know why there is a statue of Colonel Sanders in Japan.
Well, stay tuned for that forthcoming episode of Baseball by Design. In the meantime, Dan, I guess all good things must come to an end. Dan, thank you for making 2023 so much fun for the Baseball by Design podcast. Thank you for essentially being a co-host to this podcast. I know that you reject that title, but it's been a pleasure getting to hang out with you every single week. I appreciate all of the time and the effort that you put into Baseball by Design. And I hope everyone appreciates, in spite of the silliness of this episode, what an incredible graphic designer you are and how important you are to minor league baseball fans everywhere. Dan, it's an honor to be your friend, and I look forward to whatever road trip we end up taking in 2024.
Well, I know it's an oft used saying, but when I say the pleasure is mine, I truly mean it. So thank you for having me. I always, not only do I enjoy these segments that we do, when I'm a guest, when I'm doing my stumpers or whatever, I not only enjoy them, I look forward to them. So thank you.
Well, here's to another year of Baseball by Design. Dan, thank you. Appreciate you so much. And we'll see you on the next episode in 2024. Happy New Year, everyone.
See ya.